My name is Arthur. I am 52 years old, and up until 3 weeks ago, I believed I knew every square inch of the house I live in. I should know it. I designed it. I am an architect by trade. 20 years ago, when my wife Sarah and I were just starting to see some real money coming in, we bought a plot of land in upstate New York. It was a beautiful wooded acreage where the reception was terrible, and the air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. I drew the plans myself. It was my magnum opus, the place where we would raise our son, Daniel, and where we would eventually retire to drink wine on the porch and complain about our joints. Daniel moved out last year. He took a job in London, leaving Sarah and me in a house that suddenly felt twice as big and half as loud. The silence in the hallways was heavy. To distract myself from the empty nest syndrome, I decided it was time to renovate. The master bedroom needed repainting, and the hardwood in the hallway had been squeaking in a way that drove me crazy for a decade. It started on a Tuesday. I was in the upstairs hallway, tape measure in hand, looking at the wall that separated our bedroom from the guest room, the room that used to be Daniel's. I was planning to install a built-in bookshelf. I needed to find the studs. I ran my stud finder across the drywall. Beep, beep, beep. Then silence. I moved the device a few feet to the right. Nothing. That was odd. I tapped the wall with my knuckle. It sounded hollow, but deep. A rich, echoing thud that didn't sound like drywall over timber. It sounded like space. I went downstairs to my study and pulled out the original blueprints. I hadn't looked at them in years. The paper was yellowing, smelling of old ammonia. I unrolled them on my desk, weighing the corners down with coffee mugs. I looked at the second floor layout. Master bedroom on the left. Daniel's room on the right. A shared wall separating them. I went back upstairs and measured. The interior width of the master bedroom was 14 feet. The interior width of Daniel's room was 12 feet. The total width of the house, exterior to exterior, was 30 feet. I did the math. 14 plus 12 is 26. Even accounting for the exterior walls and the interior partition, there was a discrepancy. There was a 4-foot gap. I stood in the hallway, staring at the wall. A 4-foot gap running the entire length of the rooms. In my original design, that space didn't exist. I remember drawing that wall. It was a single partition. But as I stood there, I realized the door frames to the bedrooms were further apart than they should have been. How had I lived here for 20 years and not noticed a 4-foot void in the center of my own home? I called Sarah up. She was in the garden pruning the hydrangeas. When I explained it to her, she gave me that look, the one that says, "Arthur, you are overthinking things again." She told me it was probably just utility space for the HVAC ducts or plumbing. But I designed the HVAC. The ducts ran through the attic, not the wall. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the wall Sarah and I shared with the void. It was dead silent. Usually, houses make noise. They settle. Pipes groan. But that wall was silent. At 3 a.m., I got out of bed. I went to the garage and grabbed a sledgehammer and a drywall saw. I know how this sounds. It sounds like a midlife crisis manifesting as home destruction. But you have to understand, I am a man of precision. My entire career is built on measurements being exact. This impossibility was itching under my skin. I went into the guest room, Daniel's old room, because I didn't want to make a mess in our bedroom. I pushed his old dresser aside. I measured 4 feet from the exterior wall to ensure I was cutting into the void, not a support beam. I cut a small square into the drywall, about the size of a shoebox. I shone my flashlight into the hole. The beam didn't hit insulation. It didn't hit ducts. It traveled into darkness. The air that drifted out was cold and stale. It didn't smell like construction dust. It smelled like old paper and lavender. I widened the hole. I cut a space big enough to crawl through. I stepped into the gap. It wasn't a utility chase. It was a hallway. A narrow, 4-foot wide hallway that ran between the rooms. The floor was carpeted in a dark red wool I had never purchased. The walls were hung with wallpaper, a floral, Victorian pattern that Sarah would have hated. I stood there in the dark, my flashlight beam shaking. This space was impossible. I built this house from a foundation up. I framed these walls myself. I knew every nail. This hallway physically could not exist. At the end of the narrow corridor was a door. A solid oak door with a brass handle. I walked toward it. The silence here was oppressive. It felt like the air was thicker, harder to breathe. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped into a room. It was a small study. No windows. Just walls lined with bookshelves, a heavy mahogany desk, and a single leather armchair. A green banker's lamp sat on the desk, unlit. I swept my flashlight over the books. They weren't ours. They were old encyclopedias, medical textbooks, and leather-bound journals. I walked to the desk. There was a framed photograph on it. I picked it up, and my knees almost gave out. The photo was of me. But it wasn't the me of today. It was a younger version, maybe 30 years old. I was standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. A brutalist concrete structure that looked like a government facility. Standing next to me was a woman. It wasn't Sarah. It was a woman with sharp, dark features and sad eyes. We were holding hands. I had never met this woman in my life. I had never owned a gray suit like the one I was wearing in the photo. I sat down in the leather chair. It creaked, a familiar sound. I opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside were stacks of letters. The handwriting was mine. I know my own handwriting, the way I loop my YS and the sharp slant of my TS. I opened the first letter. It was dated May 14th, 1998. That was the year Sarah and I got married. The letter read, "My dearest Elena, the project is becoming difficult. The integration is seamless, but the memory bleed is getting worse. I sometimes dream of a woman named Sarah. I dream of a house in the woods. I know these are just the implant scenarios, but they feel so real. I miss you. I hope the extraction team gets me out before the overlay becomes permanent. I don't want to forget who I really am." I dropped the letter. My hands were trembling violently now. Implant scenarios. Overlay. I grabbed another letter, dated 5 years later. The subject, Arthur, is happy. The simulation of the child, Daniel, is proceeding within expected parameters. I feel a deep affection for the boy, even though I know he is just code. It is getting harder to distinguish the mission from the cover. I have to remind myself every morning, my name is not Arthur. My name is Silas. I am an operative for the consensus. This is a deep cover observation post. I couldn't breathe. I stood up, knocking the chair over. I looked around the room. The books on the shelves, I pulled one down. The Architecture of Artificial Consciousness. Synthetic Memory Formation. I ran out of the room. I ran down the red-carpeted hallway and scrambled back through the hole in the wall into Daniel's old room. I sat on the floor, gasping for air, clutching the letter. It had to be a prank. Daniel. It had to be Daniel. He was always clever, always into sci-fi. Maybe he built this? But how? He was 22. He couldn't have built a secret room inside the walls without me knowing. And the smell of this place was ancient. I went into the master bedroom. Sarah was asleep. I looked at her face, the gentle lines around her eyes, the way her hand curled under the pillow. I loved her. I knew I loved her. That love was the most real thing I possessed. I went back downstairs to the kitchen. I poured myself a whiskey. I sat there until the sun came up, reading the letters. There were dozens of them. They chronicled a life I didn't remember. A life of espionage, corporate warfare, and a desperate longing to escape a simulation. According to the letters, my entire life, my career, my marriage, my son, was a construct. A cover designed to hide me while I monitored something. But the letters stopped abruptly 10 years ago. The last entry was just one line. I am choosing the dream. I am deleting the exit codes. I am Arthur. I sat there in the morning light, the coffee machine humming its timer. I wanted to burn the letters. I wanted to patch the wall and never speak of it again. I wanted to be Arthur. I wanted to be the architect who missed his son and loved his wife. But then I saw it. On the kitchen counter, where I had left my phone. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message. The number was blocked. The message was simple. We saw the breach. The containment is compromised. Extraction team is inbound. ETA 10 minutes. I looked out the window. A black SUV was turning into our driveway. It was silent. No engine noise. Just the crunch of tires on gravel. I ran upstairs. I didn't wake Sarah. What could I tell her? That she wasn't real? That I wasn't real? I went back into Daniel's room. I crawled back through the hole in the wall. I am sitting in the hidden study now. I have locked the oak door. I can hear heavy footsteps in the house. They are not looking for Arthur. They are looking for Silas. I am writing this on the back of one of the old letters. I am going to hide it in the vent. If you are reading this, maybe you are part of the cleanup crew. Maybe you are a new tenant. I don't know what is going to happen when they get through that door. But I need to put this on record. My name is Arthur. I designed this house. I love my wife. I miss my son. My memories are mine. The time I broke my arm falling off the swing set. The time Sarah and I danced in the rain in Paris. The way Daniel smelled when he was a newborn. If those are fake, then I don't want to be real. The footsteps are in the hallway now. They have found the false wall. I am going to close my eyes. I am going to think about the porch I built. I am going to think about the smell of pine needles. If I believe it hard enough, maybe I can make it true. They are at the door. Goodbye.